Recording. Okay. So I'd like to begin by asking you about your experience in philosophy. Like, how did you start studying it, and what was the reason?
Well, when I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years old, my sister started telling me things that must have come out of Bertrand Russell's Problems of Philosophy book. And I distinctly remember talking about the table, right? The whole business that Russell goes on about the table, how do we know it's real and all that sort of thing. And when I heard that, I thought it was, one of the craziest things that I'd ever heard in my life. Of course, the table is real. It's right there and I can touch it. And what else do I need to know? So I actually got an interest in philosophical topics at a very young age, and grew up watching a lot of science fiction programs on television, many of which had philosophical themes that they presented from time to time. So that was all kind of, percolating in the back of my head as I was growing up. So it's a lifelong interest, basically.
What kind of questions were most relevant for you? And especially like from the beginning, have you resolved this question? Is table real, or it's just your...
Well, my first thing I would say about philosophical questions is you never resolve them, and that's fine. That they don't actually have specific resolutions. I still firmly believe that the table is real, that the table at the computer that I'm talking to you on is a real table, and the ones next to me. And I don't feel any great need to question their existence any more deeply than that. So what kind of questions are relevant? Well, in philosophy, I mean, it's the basic ones, and they were kind of summarized, I think, by Kant, maybe, which is what can we know? How should we live? What should we be able to believe in? And I would probably add to that is what is there? What is reality? I would add that to it as well. And so those kind of are the fundamental areas that they talk about in philosophy, right? We got metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, and with those things. And I consider myself to be an eclectic pragmatist in terms of my philosophical beliefs, which means I will draw things from as many different schools and authors and thinkers as possible. I don't necessarily care about their credentials. I care that what they have to say is of interest to me. And the pragmatist part of me says, are these things that I can actually apply and use in my life?
But if you have some kind of contradictory principles, like if they contradict each other, is it still okay to have
Oh, absolutely. And the way I kind of have resolved that in my head is I actually believe that the world and nature and things like that fundamentally contains contradictions. And it doesn't particularly bother me. That doesn't mean that I don't occasionally look at them and say, which idea means more to me right now than maybe it meant yesterday or will mean tomorrow. But contradictions don't freak me out, and which is odd considering my training as a mathematician, because that was one of the things that, proof by contradiction is one of the cornerstones of mathematical thought. I'm a little more skeptical of that now than I was, 40 years ago when I was a math student. But
yeah, I remember like reading Kant. He had these 4 antinomies, like 4 aporias, that the world is finite, and he goes on and tells you why the world is finite, and then he make an opposite statement and says that the world is infinite, and then he goes on and proves that it's also true. And I tried to figure out. I honestly, I tried even to memorize like one of his theses and his proof, but it was like, it's very hard. I couldn't actually follow just one page. It was almost impossible. Maybe I should try it once again. But yeah, and there's another contradiction that things are made of particles, or like they have parts, or they don't have parts, and it's just one whole. And it seems counterintuitive, but why it can be both? Like in modern physics, right? We have particles, we have waves, and it's simultaneously like if you have an observer, there's
and the answer that you get to, is it a particle or is it a wave? It just depends on what question you're asking and how you're asking it, right? What instrumentation you use to do your experiment and that sort of thing. So again, nature, I think, fundamentally has contradictions built into it, and I think it's basically a limitation of our own thought that we have not grown up enough to be able to just deal with that. And I'm trying. I mean, as I'm getting older, I'm trying to get better at those kinds of things. So,
so you said you started at very young age, and I'd like to ask you, like, was the interest in philosophy stable, or sometimes it just got a little bit, smaller, and sometimes it got bigger, like across the life?
Oh, sure. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the course of one's life, one's interests move around a lot, and I'm a person who's interested in a great many things. So yeah, there were certainly times when it would have taken a back seat to other things, although still in the back of your head, when you read a novel or you watch a television show or something like that, that kind of comes up, with what kind of questions did they portray in this story, and how is it relevant to the rest of existence, and that's kind of a philosophical type of question.
How you changed your opinions from time to time? Like, for example,
Absolutely.
I remember myself like believing. First, when I read Hegel, I was really influenced by Hegel, and I was under kind of this idealistic spell for more than a year, probably.
Yeah.
But then when I started reading other philosophers, it changed my mind, and I couldn't believe that I believed in everything I read from Hegel for so much. But then again, like in my experience, it seems I also came to sort of what you describe, like pragmatic. What was the word? Pragmatic.
Eclectic
pragmatism. Yeah, but from my personal point of view, it's more close to skepticism. So basically, I'm not trying to hold any beliefs, but if something helps me to understand what's going on, so I basically try to adapt it for some practical purposes. But if it doesn't work, I just I find something that works better.
Works better for now, and maybe it doesn't work better tomorrow, but if it works better for now, then we got to apply it in the moment, and be a little existentialist that way. But
yeah, there was different situations, like when something worked in one situation may not work in the situation which is different from this one. Yeah, all right.
That you learn reading a bunch of different philosophers is none of them actually has the answer. And that's true of in philosophy, and you ask about science and religion, that's true of science and religion too. Actually, there are no conclusive answers that get presented by any of those, even though all of them will claim that they have conclusive answers to things. They're basically bullshitting you.
I came to the conclusion that it's like everybody actually has an answer, and every philosophy is right, but it's right from its own point, and
that's fair.
So it's not like denying everybody is wrong, but everybody is right, but they're right only in their own certain way.
Yep.
So what do you think about the progress in philosophy on a mass level, like in general? Have we evolved? Yeah.
Well,
was there any progress in the first place?
I think there is, although progress is kind of one of those nebulous terms that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about. I can say personally, because for me, I consider philosophy is very much a personal, individualistic thing. I can say that my own philosophy has, you later use the word evolved, and I think I would prefer the term evolve to the term progress. And by evolved, I mean response to things in the environment, whether those be physical changes or things I've read or other things that I see. So philosophy evolves rather than makes progress. I don't know how one would even describe progress in in philosophy. And one of the other things that happens with the philosophy is when it feels that it does make progress, it spins off another field, right? I mean, physics is spun off from philosophy.
Basically, every science,
art theory is spun off from philosophy and things like that.
So, but you know, in terms of like in physics, for example, we have certain knowledge, and it seems that well, not all physicists, but basically there's some consensus in physics and biology and chemistry. There's some concepts, and it seems that people agree that this is true. Like nobody tries to question like the basic assumptions. Whereas in philosophy, we see that every philosopher try to, you know, question everything. And you read one philosopher, and nobody agrees with anybody. Everybody claims that, you know, their truth is the only truth, even if it's like skepticism when they say that there's no truth at all, and this is also kind of truth, right?
Right.
And
they're all wrong. To me, I don't think I can partially agree with all of them. I cannot fully agree with any of them, and never will. And nor would I expect anyone to fully agree with me, because they should be thinking for themselves rather than worrying about what I think or what somebody else thinks.
It's more of asking questions, not actually answering them, not coming to the conclusions, but asking and, you know, having this whatever, like this intellectual pursuit and thinking about different questions. Was there some particular questions which you which you may describe a kind of history, like when you were thinking for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and which were particularly exciting and you know, maybe fruitful, whatever?
Sure. Well, a question which has been with me my entire life, again, has to do with life on other worlds, and also other forms of life on this world that it turns out are more complicated than we'd given them credit for. That is one of the things that I kind of picked up from Carl Sagan. Is he had a term which he called, I think it's something like species chauvinism was the term that he used, which is the tendency for humans to think that they really are that much different and better than every other form of life. And I don't really buy that notion. Clearly we're different because we're here having this conversation and our dogs are not, but are we really that much better than other forms of life? And the answer is no. I think, you know, we've had a few, maybe 100,000 years of brain evolution that puts us on a different path than they are, but there's no reason why in a few 100,000 years they could not. The only reason why they couldn't have that kind of brain evolution would be because we killed them.
Yeah, sure.
Which happened to a lot of our ancestor species. They're like the Denisovans and the Neanderthals and things like that. Is they basically, we killed them. We killed the competition. That's why there are multiple intelligent at our level primates wandering around the earth now. So but that whole question of life on other planets is just one that has utterly fascinated me. And I am hoping in my lifetime that we find some, even if it's very simple, like just finding something that had an independent evolutionary change, I think will have profound philosophical consequences for us as humans and as earthlings. So that's my big. How about you? What's your big?
Well, no, I somehow was convinced by. No, I didn't actually read anything about this, but I've heard many times that, you know, there was some scientific optimism in the middle 20th century about, you know, when we started launching ships and, you know, Sputniks and all this stuff, and people soon will discover aliens and, you know, different planets, life on different planets. But somehow it all died out in a few decades, and they started saying exactly the opposite. So they said there's no way. There's if we could discover any life, we basically would be able to get some radio waves or any other form of communication. But it seems that the rest of the universe is silent, and you just yeah, I don't know, but I never gave so much attention to this matter.
What does grab your attention? What's been your question for
I'm puzzling with determinism. I guess it's one of the most profound questions, and for me, it basically changed all my life. Like when I started thinking, since I had many traumas from my childhood, like my first 20 years was just hell, and I blamed myself for that. So I thought it's actually my personality, and I could do better. I could change my life, and if only I were smarter at these moments when some terrible things were going on. And when I discovered determinism, it was such a relief. I realized, yeah, it's always exactly as it happened, and there was no way to do it otherwise. And yeah, from that moment, I started, but I'm trying to find the opposite. Like, I'm not trying to prove myself that determinism is true. I'm trying to disprove it, and for the last 9 years, I can't find any plausible solution. Even compatibilism, sometimes I think it may be the case, but if I read more about compatibilism or listen to people who talk about it, it still doesn't make perfect sense, since you can't unite actually both. You can say there's some possibility for freedom when you think, like a simple example may be, like, for example, I ask you to say one word, any word, like, just let's make a thought experiment, like one word. Can you say one word?
Sure. Rutabaga.
Okay. If we get back in time, and everything will proceed in the same way, so we'll have the same conversation, we'll have this, like, everything, all atoms in the universe will be at the same places, and I ask you the same question, like, would you say a different word? How could you say a different word? Like, it seems that it's for me, it seems absolutely impossible. Like, there's no room for you to say anything else, since your neurons, your neurophysiology will work in the same way. So you will hear the same sounds, and like your entire experience basically depends and your answer depends on your entire experience. And of course, in a different situation, you may say something different, but in this particular situation, it's impossible. And then you basically generalize from that and say that, okay, if every action is predetermined by your previous experience, it means that the entire life is predetermined. But I'm not pessimistic about it. Like, I know lots of people who came to the same conclusion to, like, determinism. They become pessimistic and think, oh, life is like nothing depends on me. I do anything. It's just fate. Let's just sit and die or whatever. Yeah, I feel really great like, because of that. It makes me work more. It makes me think more and study more. And basically, I'm kind of I have lots of pleasure from realizing that I can understand it, and that so many people actually can't. That was one of my questions. But other questions, like about reality, the nature of reality, I'm still puzzled. I still like I don't believe in an objective world. So I'm influenced more by German philosophers. I've read all these guys, like starting from Hegel, then Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Kant, Feuerbach, Nietzsche, and now I'm trying to study analytic philosophy, which is Anglo-American philosophy, and it's still, like, it's very. I really try to be open-minded, so not judging anything, but still it's very hard when, for example, John Searle talks about he calls it biological, naive realism, some kind of.
Yeah,
and says that naive realism is actually the right way of looking at the world, and it was a big mistake starting from Hume and Kant to assume that we don't have a direct access to the world. So what we have is just what we perceive through our brains, and the world outside is unattainable.
Sure. I guess my response to that is, except that I am part of the world, so therefore I do have direct access to it through me. So
But no, your brain perceives itself is the same way. So it builds a model of itself. So it's the simplest. In this case, so when you say I'm a part of the world and I have an access to myself, but it's still, again, you perceive, like for example, your hand. It's basically a projection. Like you don't see your hand. Your brain makes a picture of your hand, a representation, and your consciousness is basically a representation of the outside world, which is like you can't have a direct access. You have an access only through your brain. So let's suppose there's consciousness and there's the real world, right?
Well, and the pragmatist part of me says, no, there is a real world out there.
No consciousness, yeah.
The way that it seems to behave, and occasionally has some very great surprises hidden in it, which is the part where, for me, determinism fails, is that there are, in fact, many great surprises out there in the world that are fundamentally unpredictable. And
yeah,
and determinism to me is all about prediction.
Yeah, but I agree that I'm not saying that it's possible to predict everything in the world. It's like determinism doesn't tell you what happened like next moment. It basically like kind of abstract. So you abstract these causes and effects, and you see that there's kind of, even if something surprising happens, even if we can't predict it, but it still there were some reasons for that. You can say that it happened without a reason. And if there was a reason, we were incapable to, find this reason, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But okay, let's move on. I want to, to ask you about some valuable things which you've learned from philosophy. Like what was the most important, or one thing or many things which you've learned during your experience, like studying philosophy?
Once upon a time, I had what was kind of a logical positivist attitude about things such as metaphysics and the like of that, saying, metaphysics, there is no such thing as metaphysics. You're just making it all up. I have come to modify my views on that quite a bit, where now I think, for example, all of mathematics is metaphysics. Much of the questions of the ontological type questions that I ask, they're pretty much all metaphysics. Is the table real? And in a world where the company I work for, we make, amongst other things, augmented reality software. So as we start moving into that world, where suddenly what your sensory inputs from what you think is outside are overlaid by these constructs made by the software, I think that's going to have another set of profound implications for what we come to perceive as real or not. Because still, I think even Searle would agree with this, is that we mediate between the internal and the external via our sensory inputs. And if those sensory inputs become modified by software, what does that mean? Where does that leave us? It's an intriguing area.
It's like the third reality. Yeah, I had an interesting idea about, let's suppose that we start in a dream, in a dream world, and then gradually we somehow become conscious, become awake, and then now there's 16 hours of wakefulness and 8 hours of dreaming, but we still have to get back and dreaming. But we now we have this wakefulness. But with virtual reality, with augmented reality, it at some moment it may basically push the reality out. So you will have kind of 8 hours of dreaming, like few 3 hours of reality, and 12, 13 hours of augmented reality. And it's very hard. It will be hard to determine like which one of them like real, since we may also say that dream is real.
Right. Are dreams real? And who can say one way or the other, give an absolute yes or no to that question? I don't know. There are plenty of people who have interesting chemical interactions that go on in their brain that causes them to perceive reality quite a bit differently than the way you and I might, or certainly than the way I do. And that, is that real? I think for them, it definitely is real. For me, it's real to the extent that it's an interesting chemical reaction going on in your brain. And I'm grateful that it's not, mine that's experiencing that chemical reaction. Although there may be, times when I might want to do that just to have, just for the change. I don't
So is
know.
it kind of a subjective, like all realities, is it subjective, or there's still some parts of it which we can't, we can basically deny and say that this is depends on our subjective experience. It must be real by itself or in itself.
Right. I've actually given quite a bit of thought to that question, and where I come down now is objective reality. You can think of all these subjective realities as little circles in a Venn diagram, and the part where they overlap, that and people agree on something, that's
It's
what
objective.
objective reality. But not everyone will be represented in that, what we call objective, and no one fits exactly in all the part of objective. So reality is basically a combination of things that we individually believe or think is true, and what we agree with others that they think is true. That's what we call objective reality. In terms of actually independent objective reality, I guess I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I don't think so, but I can't. It's nothing I can demonstrate one way or the other.
A little bit more about these like valuable things which you have learned from philosophy, like on kind of personal level. Is there something that you, like, let's suppose you may get back in, in my age, let's say, and what kind of things would you tell yourself if you can get back, which you have learned later?
Right. Well, I mean, the basic, I think the fundamental thing is learn to treat people better, including yourself. I think that is a fundamental problem that all of us encounter at some point in our lives, is we either aren't treating others very well, but more specifically, we don't treat ourselves very well too. And I still, that's one that I still grapple with, and that of course is an area that kind of meshes between philosophy and psychology, and maybe even a little bit of neuroscience is hiding back there too, which is why when I think about actual problems in the world, I don't say this is philosophy, this is science, this is religion, because in fact, real world problems are blends of everything, and trying to artificially silo them as particular disciplines, I think ultimately comes and bites you. And that's one reason why people don't find necessarily satisfactory answers to their questions, is because they're looking in too narrow a place for them.
Okay, empathy, treating other people, and treating yourself like better. You said like science, religion, and philosophy. They're blending, but still there's some distinction, right? Why people created these categories.
Sure. Again, look at those Venn diagrams. There are parts that overlap and plenty of parts which do not. So
let's talk about science, religion, and philosophy, in which way they may be different, and how do you perceive them from your point of view?
Well, let's see. I'll probably start with philosophy, because to me, philosophy is the part that maybe best overlaps with the other two. Science is, to me, largely a method more than it is a body of knowledge, although there is a body of knowledge certainly associated with it, but it's a way of how do we go about finding out things. And that, to me, indicates that it is an epistemological tool that can be employed by us natural philosopher types to find out things about ourselves and the world. And the product of science is that body of knowledge that it comes up with. And the pragmatist in me says that body of knowledge is somewhat tested, more heavily tested than most, so it's probably better to rely on that than to rely on other things. Religion. The questions about from religion that are most, well, first of all, I am an agnostic in terms of the whole, is there a God question? And my answer to that is, I don't know, and I don't know how I would find out, so I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. But religion itself has brought a lot of interesting things to the human condition, and I can't completely write those off. Things that I absolutely admire about religion, I admire their arts. I admire the music and the architecture and the poetry that have flown out of religious thought that the typical day-to-day working scientist is never going to come up with that kind of thing. And I'm a great respecter of the arts. And so to me, that in many ways is the great contribution of religion. Obviously, the downside of it is the thinking we have it right and everybody else has it wrong part that often seems to go with religion. And that, of course, tends to lead to, well, sometimes very bloody conflicts between different groups. And I think of the famous picture of the duck rabbit war, where they each have their flag. I don't know, you're familiar with the duck rabbit illusion, where you draw a picture there and how you look at it, could be a duck, could be a rabbit. In these countries, they go to war over, you have the duck people.
Who is right? Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I'm right, it's a duck, and so I got to go kill those people that say it's a rabbit. And that whole thing, I think, is very pathological in human behavior, and that's what I call the pathology of religion, is the we have it right and you don't feeling about it.
Do you think
and it is, sorry.
Yeah,
No,
go on.
Just to finish up then, as a philosopher, I think the part of me that is a philosopher is what lets me look at those two other areas and try to distinguish what I consider the valuable parts and the non or less valuable parts from it.
Do you think with new technologies, with the internet, it gets worse, or it actually make things better?
Well,
like this
I think
conflict between who is right, who is
sure,
wrong.
sure. I think it simply is an amplifier for what's already there. What you see, and I mean the now kind of the holy war against social media going on. I get people don't understand. We were always like that. We just didn't get a chance to see that we were always like that to the extent that we do now, because we can see more of what people, far removed from us think and say or do. If there was no social media, they'd still be thinking, saying, and doing those things. We just wouldn't know, we wouldn't see it. So in that, I tend to think of technology, I think the quote is, technology is neither good nor evil, neither is it neutral. And I tend to go in that kind of frame, that I don't either praise or blame technology for things, but I do praise or blame the technologists and the people who make use of it for how they make use of it for making their own problems. So that's where we are, I guess.
What do you think about the artificial intelligence? Like, is it
a lot about artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
My first reaction that I've developed about artificial intelligence is that Turing got it wrong in his, I think, 1950 paper that kind of founded the field. And where they got it wrong was in the assumption that we want to get machines to think like human beings. And I don't think machines will think like human beings, and I don't think human beings will think like machines. They are different kinds of things, and they're going to develop different kinds of ways of thinking. And I think that's really great, because then we can become more complementary to one another rather than worrying about, this is going to take over and do bad things and stuff like that. And we've already shown humans taking over and doing bad things. I doubt the machines could do much worse than we are.
How about will? Will machines have will as we have? Or
I don't know, and I don't know that I care. That has been my opinion about whenever the free will question comes up. My feeling is, if I have free will, I'm going to make this decision. If I don't have free will, I'm probably going to make the same decision. So in terms of that, free will is not of great importance to me. And in fact, one of my kind of more cynical feelings about free will is that it's something that was invented by Dark Ages clerics in order to let God off the hook for the problem of evil.
Evil, yeah, sure.
By blaming the victim, saying, "Oh no, it's your free will that made all this stuff happen." Then God can be. We can
Perfect. Yeah, God is perfect.
God can stay perfect, exactly, because not for this reason. So free will, I don't really care one way or the other.
We had the conversation just few hours ago at my club, and a guy said that he got some sort of existential crisis because he realized that in 10-15 years there will be some singularity and artificial intelligence will basically solve all problems, and whatever he is doing right now, it doesn't matter, since who cares if artificial intelligence will change everything. And and we had a long discussion about it. But the idea, again, like artificial intelligence, if it will be able to solve like all problems. Basically, you have a computer and it gives you any answer. So whenever you want to ask, whenever you want to do, you just type a question and it will give you an answer.
So that, of course, leads to the musical question. How do you know, A, how do you know that the answer is a correct answer? And B, how do you get the machine to explain to you how it arrived at that answer? And those are two very hot button topics in AI research now. I belong to, I don't know if you've ever heard of the IEEE. It's basically the International Organization for Electrical Engineers and things like that. I'm on a working group that is trying to create a governance document that will be published internationally, obviously, about governing AI. And they actually don't use the term artificial intelligence. They use, let's see, AIS is, I forget, something intelligent, autonomous, autonomously intelligent systems. That is, the systems that do their thing without human intervention and behave in ways that we may or may not want to call intelligent. But it's interesting, and watching the arguments going on between all of these very, very smart people, I've just been blown away by the caliber of the people in this group, trying to figure out what artificial intelligence is, right? Because that whole debate is still completely unanswered. And you can ask, 3 people that question, and you'll probably get 5 different answers or 6 different answers to it.
It's uncertain what is intelligence in this.
Right.
Not just
my feeling is I'll know it's artificial intelligence because it will tell me that it's artificially intelligence, and we'll start there. Turing test, the famous Turing test, it's already been passed by systems that are provably not what we would call intelligent systems, but they can fool judges to think that they can answer questions as good as human beings. So it turns out the Turing test really isn't very helpful ultimately. It would be what we would call a necessary but hardly a sufficient condition to determine whether something is intelligent or not. I mean, I look at my dog. My dog just impresses me the heck out of how smart he is. And then you look at things like elephants and ravens and octopus. There are a lot of, and even insect colonies and even trees. You find these behaviors that get exhibited, which are clearly goal-directed behaviors from all of them. When does that cross the line to saying that these are intelligent behaviors? And I think the answer to that is it's entirely arbitrary, depending on who you ask. So that's another thing I don't worry too much about, because I know if I think maybe the tree is intelligent, philosophers of science who I respect greatly say, no way in hell, that's crazy talk, doing that. And I said, okay, maybe it is, but I don't know that.
Yeah, but for example, language, right? So all like it seems that we are different from other species because we have capacity for for language, for understanding, and
trees have chemical language that they go, and then just because it's not sound waves doesn't mean that it's not language.
Yeah, but they can like kind of think abstract, right? They just they respond to what's there. So they get like leaves may turn to the side where the sun shines, but essentially they can make up even animals. So they can't make.
But they can use, but trees use, yeah, I think it's funguses that grow in the ground to chemically transmit messages to other trees nearby, saying things like, "I'm being attacked by this particular pest." Then it chemically synthesizes something to repel that particular pest, but it warns the other trees nearby it by sending chemical messages through the fungus in the ground.
Yeah, but they're so simple. There's like I'm attacked. Yeah, probably there's some some signal and other tree changes the behavior. But we may have a conversation, basically discuss all sorts of things which no any animal will be able to comprehend. Like when we think about the future, like in 100 years from now, and about the past, and form very complex, like mathematical system, like sciences, like biology, physiology, neurophysiology, and yeah, other species. It seems that they may have some simple language, right? They still interact with each other, and they kind of understand each other. They know who is like who is who in their social social environment, but in terms of thinking and intelligence and being able to understand language and being able to form some complex models of behavior and act then on these models and predict the future.
So let's do our little thought experiment here. Let's say just through some amazingly improbable catastrophe, the human race is destroyed. Most likely we destroy ourselves. But evolution is still going to keep on, even if all that's left is microbes. So the question is ultimately, what's going to evolve there to fill our place in the ecological niche? Right, and it could be anything, and without us there to interdict and kill it off basically before it gets a chance to be competition, because that's what we've tended to do in our history. What will evolve to fill that niche?
I hope it will be. I hope it will.
Cockroach, for all I know.
I hope it will be birds. Like I'd like to be able to fly, and have intelligence. I think it's going to be very amazing.
Birds or crabs, or who knows, anything that can do things to manipulate its environment is going to be able to create technology. And if they can create technology, then they can become us.
Yeah, I think the next question is particularly relevant to this discussion. What kinds of instincts make us philosophize? Like, what is?
Okay, so
why would
that one? It goes back to some extent, I think, of what I think it was Socrates and Aristotle said, and what they said was something like, philosophy begins in wonder. And it is the instinct of wonder. And of course, we have to ask, well, what is wonder? Because wonder is one of those words that can mean many different things. right? I think of wonder mostly in terms of curiosity, but wonder can also mean awe and just rever and that, by the way, I think is another important distinction between science and religion, is how do they interpret wonder? Science says wonder, I'm curious about how does that happen? And religion would say, that's the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. I don't need to know how it happens. I just know that it's amazing, and I'm wonder, and it strikes me with wonder. So philosophy again kind of lives in the middle as one of the connecting links, in that it can take wonder in both of those aspects and start applying them to whatever questions that you come up with. But that's the instinct, I think, is the instinct for wonder to it.
But what practical purpose does it serve? Like, is there anything?
Purpose?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, had there not been philosophy to begin with, we wouldn't necessarily have, say, science. We might have forms of technology to the same extent that, other primates and things like that have technologies for cracking open shells or prying things out of hard to get places. But wondering about, where did the fire come from, and can I do it too? Or is there an easier thing to do than pulling all these hard objects back to my tribe for food and things like that? Maybe I should invent a wheel and a wagon and something to make it easier to haul things on. So, and those guys, I think those people were thinking philosophically when they came up with those technological and scientific ideas. How can I do things better? Which kind of flows from how should I live?
So basically, the idea is to improve your condition, right? To social condition, your personal condition, just to improve your environment, to improve your communication with other people,
and to improve yourself as well. Yeah, sure. I think those are strong motivations for not just human animals, right? We see that also in things like wolf packs and lion prides and things like that. It's real, and elephants are really quite amazing to watch how they the social structure of elephants.
Okay. You mentioned Plato, Aristotle. Like, how about the Plato's idea of good in itself? Like, is it can we actually even imagine something like good in itself without being applied to some particular thing or field or anything?
I don't think I do, and I am also not a big fan of the Platonic theory of forms and many of the other ideas. That I am more of an Aristotelian than a Platonic, and Aristotle was, I think, very much empirically oriented, and that's more how I look at the world. That the world and I interact with one another, and the a priori type of ideas I have about how things should or must be in the world doesn't care what my a priori ideas are. It's going to do whatever it's going to do, and I better learn to deal with it from an evolutionary perspective, or I'm going to become extinct. So there's a lot about Plato that it just rubs me the wrong way, or it doesn't ring true for me, I guess. Ancient philosophers who I like, I'm very interested in the Pythagoreans. And that's interesting because Pythagoreanism is, of course, largely a religion, right? An ancient Greek religion. And also my hero is Diogenes and his bunch, the Cynics. I think as much of anything because of the way Diogenes recognized, I'm an animal and I'm okay living that way, that I don't need to pretend that I'm an angel or any such thing. He realized that he was an animal. The other group that I'm becoming very interested in are the Asian philosophers from China, Japan, and I'm trying to get a little grasp on what comes out of India. That one is a little more is difficult. Well, they're all difficult for me because they're all different modes of thought than the way I was brought up. But I think they're important modes of thought, and I'm trying to learn how to approach things through both the Western lens and the Eastern lens, and of course that is a horrible exaggeration to think that there is such a thing as a Western lens and an Eastern lens.
Yeah, but it still seems that right in West it's more about rationality, and in East it's kind of emotional way of looking at things, more emotional, more.
I tend to see the West as more reductionist and the East as more holistic and constructive. And when I look at phenomena, I think that there is great value in looking at them in both of those ways. That the whole, in fact, the whole is more than some of the parts, but it's still worth it knowing about the parts too. And I don't, I think you get into trouble if you ignore one at the expense of the other.
You mentioned Diogenes, and I remember a funny story about, I've read Diogenes Laertsky, and I'm not sure exactly, was it from his book or from somebody else, but the idea was that this Diogenes, the cynic, he firstly worked as a counterfeiter. So he was, he was basically a con man.
Right.
And then at some moment he went to an oracle, and oracle basically told him that you have to reevaluate the values. And he interpreted firstly as, that's how he became this counterfeiter. So he just cut like a little bit from a coin and gained some money, like became rich. But then finally, when he realized like it was, he just dropped on all his wealth and became like
lived in a barrel.
Yeah, went in the barrel. That's
my understanding, and I don't know which story is that his father was like the master of the treasury, what I guess the British would call the exchequer, or some such thing. And Diogenes was growing up to inherit the same job from his father, but then he had these visions, that and consultations with the oracle, and that's when he started defacing the currency, and eventually they just ran him out of town for being a troublemaker. Which is works well for me. I think someday I wouldn't mind being run out of town for being a troublemaker, although I just don't know that I don't know that I have that in me to be as much of a troublemaker as he was.
Yeah, nowadays it's much harder to make troubles because everybody like there's any opinion, basically any opinion, any unpopular opinion. You may go on the internet and find groups which share the same opinion, right? In ancient world, there's a particular culture, so if you don't agree with the rules, they kick you off, right? But now it seems like on the internet you may find all sorts of people and just make large communities and discuss discuss all sorts of ideas, even if they.
And it's hard for a person to navigate all that, right? To figure out where do I fit in and which directions should I go in. And again, that is, I think, the great value of philosophical thinking, because philosophical and its cousins, scientific thinking, basically encourage you to question everything. Right. When people come out with any ideas, then you need to start saying, well, how did it get that way? Or how if you follow what you're saying to its logical conclusion, how's that going to look? What will things be like? And would you like them to be that way? Is that really what you want? And you question everything. If there's anything to the philosophical mindset, it's question everything.
Yeah, but still you can be sure that even if you question, like it seems that we live in a very great abundance of information. And like the way how you choose what to pay attention to, it basically determines how you what's going on in your life. And this mechanism, yeah, you like, that's what I'm trying to do, like question everything, try to, like, don't just take superficially anything, just try to, okay, this, if this is like, if this makes sense, it doesn't mean that it's right, or maybe there are better way of understanding the same problem. But yeah, I'd like to ask you, like, how do you choose the information which you pay attention to? Like, is there some kind of special, do you trust YouTube algorithms, or Google search, or you have your
I live
own
on
way?
Google. Yeah, no, I search, I live on Google, and I frequently live on Wikipedia, and I understand that both of those are rife with incorrect data on it, so you need to take them with a grain of salt. I read books. I mean, that's the other thing that I do. I'm not a fast reader, but I eventually, and I read several different books at once, and I try to integrate the ideas in my head that I see presented by the different authors, because I'm of a believer that everything is somehow connected to everything else. So I like to make those connections in my head. And, it takes a lot of time, and it dilutes, in a sense, your ability to take action on it, because you're always more thinking about it than doing something about it. But there is a Chinese concept that's called Wu Wei, and Wu Wei basically is about taking action by not taking action. And there is, I think, something to be said for that point, that people often take actions without giving any regard to what's going to happen if I do these things. And maybe it's better just not to do them. And I think we could actually use more of that attitude in the world, because it will slow down. All right, you may have heard some of the arguments that I've had about Steven Pinker with various other members of our group. The thing that I worry about with Pinker is he cherry picks all these things that say, this is so much better now than it was then. And he's right, it is better now than it was then. But the question that gets avoided in that is, what did it cost to make those things better now than they were then? And the answer to a lot of that, we're seeing, is, of course, the world burning up, and the oceans going nuts, and the storms getting worse. The fact that in order to make all those things better required energy. And where did the energy come from? The energy largely came from fossil fuels. And now we're going to be paying the price for those improvements. And then the question is, what's going to happen to those improvements when the fossil fuels are gone, and all the other problems that are coming along with that happen?
Yeah,
so
how long are we able to sustain this, what's going on right now, right? So probably after 5, 10, 15 years, we'll get back in dark ages.
I mean, some things have already gone past the point where they will not be able to be fixed for, they may fix themselves in 100,000 or 1,000,000 years because of the dynamics of the planet. But these temperature rises that we have caused, some of them are quite permanent. And so the things that we've been seeing, like the fires and the hurricanes and all the bad storms and things like that, they're not going to go away. And in fact, unless we made changes immediately, they're just going to continue to get worse. I mean, the fires in Siberia are just, I've seen the photos of those from space, and those are just incredible. And they've caused ash to be fall on the North Pole for the first time in recorded history. We've had smoke and ash falling on the North Pole coming from the forest fires. I am very concerned about, quite frankly, the future for people. I don't see an extinction level event in all this. I do see civilization kind of falling down and going boom, as it were, possibly as a result of all this.
Yeah, but still, now we already know how to get to this point. Probably, even if there's, as you say, there may be an extinction, but not like it seems to be impossible to wipe out the entire species, still somebody will, will survive, and finally, like in next 100,000 years, I don't know how long, but still, will still. It seems that I don't believe that in like sustained progress. So for me, it seems that we probably were in similar states before, not in the exact state like that, but generally it seems that the nature, like, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down all the time, or just by by a spiral. And the point which we achieved, at least we now understand that it's possible to create some kind of, to create technologies like that, to create communications like that, to create societies like that. And if we are able to preserve it in, in stories, in myths, in science, in books, in some form, it will be much easier to get there the next time. Even if we destroy our planet for, let's say, there's 4,000 years, there will be like no possibility for life. We still, like,
1,000 years is nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Like how long it exists, like 4 billion years.
And then you have to look at things like the I think it's the Permian extinction was the one that wiped out 96% of all species. So big, but not 100% though, of course, but 96%. And the ones that go first, of course, are the most complex ones, because they have the most dependence on the ones below them in the food chain. But yeah, I mean, something will survive. My money is on cockroaches. That I think, I would not be shocked if I could look into a lens and see a few 100 million years from now, to see insects running this planet and see insects having these kinds of conversations like we're having right now. I think why not? Evolution is capable of producing pretty much anything.
It seems that this, this faculty, reason, or mind, or no, now I call it language. That for me now there is no big distinction between language and mind. But it seems like it always wants more. It always wants more. It's never able to stop and say, okay, this is the limit. I'm going to repeat the same experience forever. Like, it's always goes forward. But reach a certain level and then it falls back. I was thinking last week about the nature of happiness, and I came to a paradoxical conclusion that the most happiest state is actually the worst state you can be, since if there's time, the next moment you have to fall down, so you can preserve it forever, right? You can be in the most happiest state, and then if you achieve this state, basically it's the worst state, because the only way from there is to be less happy. And the opposite way is, if you, like, in the worst state, if you're totally miserable, it can be worse. It's the best state, since the next step, like the next moment, you're going to improve, you're going to be better.
So I think what you're describing is what in mathematics we call inflection points. And an inflection point is where something goes, it's at its peak and it either stays steady or starts dropping, or it's at its valley and then it stays there or starts climbing. My feeling about that is everything that I have seen in my experience in this universe is everything is cyclical and involves what we call simple harmonic motion. That is, everything is constantly going up and down, and accepting that is possibly the key to maintaining, I don't know if you want to call it happiness, maintaining a positive outlook, maintaining wonder about things, is that things are constantly in motion, but they're constantly in motion that recurs over it. I mean, planets orbit, seasons happen. The repetitive patterns of nature are what define our lives.
Okay. The question about nature of life, like, I was reading a lot of Schopenhauer, And in Schopenhauer, the bottom line is the world is terrible, life is not worth living, and it's better
Sucks
not.
to be him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's better not to live. And
Yeah.
Schopenhauer had a very good life, but he like in his time there were lots of problems, and basically most of people suffered from. It was the beginning of industrial era, and working all the time and having nothing. What are your thoughts about this like pessimistic view? And let's say that there's like, is it better to live and have this terrible, or no, not necessarily terrible, but is it better to live and have experience, no matter what kind of experience it is, or it's better not to live at all, not to have any experience? Since if you don't have any experience, you don't care about anything that's going on, and it seems to be.
Yeah, and with that, I think I'm going to go and I'm going to kind of draw on science fiction. I'm in fact going to draw on a Doctor Who quote about that, where it talks about life being full. You have a pile of good things and you have a pile of bad things. Having the bad things does not remove the good things. Having the good things does not get rid of the bad things. The question is, how do you deal? How do you deal with your two piles, with your good things and your bad things? And would you be better off not ever having had either of them? No, I don't think so. I have plenty of memories about, and the funny thing about memory is memory tends to be selective about the bad things. As you can remember mistakes that you have made in life forever. I remember mistakes that I made when I was young, very young, before teenager or that age. So, 50 some years ago, I still remember them very vividly. But I also do remember a certain amount of the good things. And when I think about them, they make me smile. And smiling, how else are we going to tell? How do we tell that a person is happy about something? And one of the ways that we do it, I think, is we see them smile about it, or laugh. I mean, laughter is probably the ultimate piece of medicine for many ills. I mean, some of them are clearly physical and need physical treatment, but if you can laugh, you can handle a great deal of the bad things that life puts in your pile, I think. So that's an area of philosophy I think is very heavily underrepresented. There are people who have done studies on comedy and laughter and things like that. And in humor, I've read some of them, but I think it's an area that should have more attention paid to it.
Yeah, Schopenhauer also wrote about humor. I remember some articles, but I don't remember the content. But he has his own theory of humor, and yeah, he probably came to the similar conclusions that no matter how hard is life, it's still you may always laugh, and since it's just temporary. It doesn't matter if you suffer. Yeah, if you suffer.
Cicero wrote a book about humor and jokes that's very interesting. More recently, Daniel Dennett had, I think, co-authored a book about studying humor, because he strikes me as a guy who has a marvelous sense of humor, and I would like to see and hear more of it. But as parts of human life go, I don't know that it gets any better than being able to laugh at something, and especially to be able to laugh at yourself. Because I know I do things that when I look on them say, that's funny as hell. Why did I do that? And what would I do if someone else had done something like that? And it makes me laugh. It doesn't make me say, oh, it's bad, it's a mistake. Oh no, I'm not perfect. We're laughable. We really are laughable as creatures. And we need to do that more.
Yeah, but sometimes like people take themselves very seriously, right? And
at their own expense. Yes, they do. Yes,
yeah, and yeah, I also like this attitude towards life, when when you're confident in something, sure 100%, and then you kind of make a fool of yourself. It doesn't actually matter, no. Like when you're able to laugh and just see it from like, oh, I made a mistake. I made said something silly, but it's fun. It's fun. Why
It
should
is.
why should
If
I
you're
take
not,
myself so seriously and think, oh, I made a mistake and now everybody will hate me or
so
something
if
else?
you're not making mistakes, that means you're not trying, I think,
Yeah.
because most of what we do is going to be a mistake. Most of it is. And the question is, how do you learn? What do you learn from having made that mistake? Hopefully you learn how to do it differently and maybe better next time, but sometimes we don't.
Okay, I guess one more question
Sure.
about thinking. Like the
About
name,
thinking.
yeah.
Yeah, we kind of talked about
What
that.
is thinking? Like in what kind of thinking are in philosophy? Like basically,
Right.
I want like tell me about your personal experience. Like how do you think and how would you describe this activity?
Sure. I mean, I'm right by profession. I'd mostly been a software engineer in my life, so I tend to think of thinking in terms of information processing, which is one way of looking at it. It's not necessarily the only way or the best way, but thinking comes, for me, comes from turning raw data, raw information into useful chunks of knowledge. And that's probably a fairly worthless definition in terms of explaining what's going on to other, but remember, as a pragmatist, ultimately what I want to get is I want to get something there that allows me to make a decision or take an action or be able to do something that I can use in the external world to change or help things or whatever. So thinking is how I go about taking what I see, read, hear, whatever, and then trying to turn that into useful activities.
Is it like sensory data, right? But
Sure can be, sure.
reading is kind of information. So you basically discern something. You don't just
Yeah, I mean,
get
sensory
everything.
data, it's also internal. I think it's
Hmm.
also internal
Hmm.
data as well, because remember that we are not just brains, we are brains that are in bodies, that are in environments, and all of those things are necessary in order to have thinking. So if I was just a brain in a vat, I would be losing out a lot because I understand that my body, and by the way, the parasites and things that inhabit my body, because my body is not just me. There's a whole ecosystem that lives in your body that goes on, and that's makes you part of who you are,
Hmm.
right? So
Microbiome, like all these
yep,
colonies of
in your gut,
microbes, and
in your nervous system, in your brain, there are bugs that live in your brain basically, and they can have an impact on your personality and the way you think. Because we're biology. We are not abstract creatures. We are biological. We're
mhm,
animals, and we can't lose sight of that fact.
mhm. Do you think that like this intelligence or consciousness is possible without bodies? Like
Um,
some sort of uploaded the, on the internet and existing without having
it's
any.
gotta, well, I mean, it's gotta have some form of physical medium. And I suppose if one converts that from carbon-based mediums to silicon-based mediums, which is what electronics is made out of, maybe. I can't say yes, I can't say no. I've certainly never seen anything to convince me that it's been done, but I tend to think that everything that can happen, given enough time, eventually must happen. And just if it's a non-zero probability, and there's very few things that have a zero probability, it will eventually happen.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I doubt I'll live to see it. I doubt, if you'll live to see it, because we figure you're probably in your mid 40s or something like that. Is that what I gathered from what you were saying?
Well, mid 30s.
Mid-30s. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm probably about the same age as your father, somewhere in there. So I don't know. I mean, I got probably another, 10, 20 good years, but
My father actually was 45 when I was born. So
oh,
he,
okay. Oh my
he,
goodness. Oh.
yeah, he died 10 years ago.
Yeah, I lost my dad in 1995,
Mm.
96, right around the end of the year there. Long time ago. He was 72 then, but at any rate,
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for a conversation. That was very
yeah,
nice. I enjoyed it.
and good luck
Hope,
with your study of virtue. I'll see
yeah,
if I can.
virtue. Actually, I was exhausted. Like yesterday, we had this conversation about virtue, and
Mhm.
basically we considered four cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance. What else?
Courage and
Justice and
justice.
for fortitude. And yeah, I think we may discuss it later, like next time probably.
One thing I was curious about just on the writings that you had posted, I'm curious, you seem to represent virtue as female. And
It
I
was,
was very,
yeah.
very curious about how that came to be.
Well, I just try to play with the idea.
Yeah,
So
okay.
for me, it's like I don't like to write in this conventional way when you make a premise and then you like make some statements, you prove what's wrong, what's right. For me, it's just a play. So I imagine.
You're a poet. I see that about you. So
Yeah. I just take virtue, an old woman, like very old concept, and like and I kind of interact with it in my imagination, and
sure.
try to see how it's gonna go, and the entire thing it's
All right.
some sort of play. Okay.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
very much. It was a good time.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.